Daniel Mercer, a 57-year-old single father and mechanic, buys what Sutton Motor Gallery dismisses as a $700 non-running Cobra kit. CEO Claire Sutton publicly challenges him to make it move under its own power, promising him the complete vehicle if he succeeds. Daniel discovers the supposedly fiberglass body is hand-formed aluminum and finds several deliberate storage immobilizers, including a master cutoff disconnected brake line, reversed distributor contact, and altered clutch linkage. After carefully documenting everything and completing independent safety inspections, he safely drives the Roadster 61 feet, legally securing its body, engine, gearbox, and components for $700. Suspicious that the car is historically significant, Daniel preserves its evidence despite Sutton's legal challenges and pressure to sell. Experts eventually authenticate it as XR4, a surviving 1963 experimental development roadster, using unique frame repairs, hidden markings, period components, archival photographs, and testimony from the original fabricator. Daniel rejects a $3.2 million collector offer requiring misleading restoration, and instead partners with a heritage foundation to conserve the vehicle accurately. Claire eventually accepts the evidence and cooperates with the archive, while Daniel and his son Eli preserve the Roadster as an important piece of automotive history rather than turning it into a polished trophy. Daniel looked at the flat tires, disconnected brake line, cracked fuel hose, and wheeled dollies beneath all four corners. "I can make it move," he said. "I won't do it in a room full of people with no safety inspection." Claire folded her arms. She was 47 and chief executive of Sutton Motor Gallery, a high-end collection and auction business in Scottsdale, Arizona. The blue Roadster had sat on dollies at the back of her father's private collection for 29 years. Her inventory called it a non-running fiberglass Cobra kit with a display engine and no transferable title. Daniel touched the exposed edge of the passenger door. Beneath peeling blue paint was dull silver metal hammer, marked and thin. "That body isn't fiberglass," he said. Claire's smile disappeared. "Put your challenge in writing," Daniel continued. "Complete vehicle as displayed, including engine, gearbox, rear assembly instruments, and attached panels. It moves under its own power only after brake, steering, fuel, and frame pass inspection. We test it outside." Claire looked toward the live stream camera. She had made the challenge to embarrass the mechanic who paid $700 for a dead kit car during her collection clearance sale. More than 400 viewers had heard it. 40 bidders stood around the Roadster. Her own auction manager held the paid invoice. "You haven't made it move," she said. "Then the paper costs you nothing." Her general counsel, Reed Fallon, took the invoice from the manager. The printed lot description read, "Blue Cobra-style roller, non-operational, no keys, engine present for display, sold as is." Daniel had bought lot 31 at 1:16 p.m. Claire made the challenge at 1:19. Reed pointed to the phrase "engine present for display." "The engine may not have been included in the conveyance. Then your CEO offered me a vehicle she knew could not move under its own power." Several bidders heard him. Claire did too. She instructed Reed to draft a one-page challenge addendum. Daniel required the word "complete" before vehicle and listed the major assemblies individually. Claire required movement of at least 25 feet on the gallery's closed service road before 3 p.m. The following day, a licensed safety inspector had to approve the attempt. Daniel could repair or replace consumable safety items, but he could not replace the engine, gearbox, frame, body axles, steering rack, or instruments. If the Roadster moved 25 feet under engine power, Sutton would issue a complete bill of sale and release every listed assembly for the $700 purchase price. If it failed, Daniel could keep the body shell and rolling chassis, but Sutton would remove the engine and gearbox as collection display assets. Daniel disliked the last condition. It meant failure would split a machine whose identity he did not yet understand. That was exactly why he signed. Claire signed at 1:34. Reed notarized both signatures. Auction manager Joel Price uploaded the addendum to the sale record and handed Daniel 2 paper copies. Only then did Daniel ask for wheel chocks. Daniel, 57, kept Mercer Machine and Brake operating in Oildale, California. The shop had 2 bays of machine room and a blue roll-up door his late wife had helped paint. He repaired fleet trucks and old American cars with 2 employees. His 14-year-old son Eli spent afternoons there doing homework, cleaning parts, and learning that the order of a test mattered as much as the number it produced. They had traveled to Scottsdale for a brake lathe auction. Daniel needed a replacement crossfeed screw, and Sutton's catalog listed a crate of compatible tooling. The crate sold above his limit. Eli noticed the Cobra-style roadster while they waited to pay for 2 smaller lots. Its blue paint had peeled from the nose in thin, curled flakes. Underneath, there was no woven fiberglass. The door hinges bolted to hand-shaped aluminum boxes. The footwells were riveted instead of molded. A standard kit builder could use aluminum, but few did it under paint meant to hide the material. More troubling was the frame. Through a missing carpet panel, Daniel saw a rectangular rail repaired on the passenger side with a long fish mouth insert. The weld had been filed almost smooth. One bolt hole beside it sat visibly too high, as if a fabricator had drilled from a bad template and corrected the location later. Daniel bought the roadster because $700 was less than the value of its instruments and rear assembly. He did not buy it believing he had found a lost factory car. Claire's challenge turned that modest purchase into a 25-hour problem. The first task was custody. Daniel photographed the signed addendum, every serial and casting number. He could see all 4 sides of the vehicle, the cutoff, the safety pin, and the aluminum body edge. Eli filmed Joel removing the lot tag and attaching a paid tag without pausing the recording. Daniel requested Sutton's fixed security video from 10 minutes before the sale through the signed addendum. Joel agreed because the record protected the auction company too. Claire objected when Daniel asked to move the roadster from the public gallery into the service bay. "It stays where my cameras can see it," she said. "Then nobody inspects the fuel system and it doesn't start." The gallery's insurer settled the argument. Its representative prohibited fuel work in the public room and required the car to enter the ventilated service bay. Sutton employees pushed it on the dollies while Joel's camera recorded continuously. Daniel called Mara Singh, a licensed vehicle safety inspector who had examined vintage race cars at 2 Arizona tracks. She had no relationship with Sutton. Mara agreed to supervise for her standard day rate paid equally by both parties under the addendum. She arrived at 2:20 with a brake pressure gauge, steering play indicator, fuel-safe temporary cell, and written checklist. Her first instruction was simple: "No ignition test until I say the word." Daniel agreed. He removed the hood pins while Eli logged time and witnesses. The hood weighed less than expected. Its underside showed rows of tiny hammer marks, and a rolled edge formed around wire, not a molded flange. The entire body appeared to be aluminum. The engine beneath it was an early small block Ford with 4 downdraft carburetor throats, an aluminum intake, and a narrow cast bell housing. Dust covered everything evenly. The hoses had hardened. The wiring was cloth-bound in places and modern plastic in others. A chain held the transmission in neutral because the shifter had been removed. Reed stood beside the bay doors. "The engine has its own collection number." Daniel photographed the small brass tag wired to the lifting eye. It read, "Display Power Unit 14. When was the tag attached before the sale?" Joel checked the intake database. The collection number was assigned in 2002. The engine was already installed. According to the photograph, yes. Daniel asked for the photograph. It showed the same engine under the same hood with the same dust pattern around a missing air cleaner. The display tag was absent from a gallery image dated 1997. Claire entered the service bay. "My father treated engines and bodies as separate assets. That was normal for his displays. Your addendum treats them as one vehicle if it moves." If Daniel returned to the inspection, the tires could not support a powered test. Sutton had 4 used racing tires of the correct size in its parts storage. Claire offered them at $900. Daniel declined and called a local vintage tire supplier. The supplier had transport-rated tires that fit the wheels for $620, installed on an emergency schedule. Daniel paid from the money he had planned to spend on brake lathe tooling. While they waited, Mara tested the brake system. The pedal went to the floor because a short flex line at the right front caliper had been disconnected and capped. The master cylinder held clean fluid, unusual for a car described as abandoned. The cap looked recent. Daniel asked when Sutton last moved the car. Claire said never under power. Her staff rolled it on dollies for display changes. Mara removed the cap and pressure tested the line. The hard lines held. The caliper piston moved when fed from her hand pump. The disconnected hose had not failed. Someone had deliberately separated it. Eli found the missing flex line in a canvas tool pouch behind the driver's seat. It was old, but unused, tagged with a handwritten note, RF, for moving only. Daniel did not install it. Rubber that old could split under pressure. The addendum allowed consumable safety items, so he ordered 4 new brake hoses and retained every original in labeled bags. The steering showed less than 1 inch of wheel play. Suspension joints moved but needed lubrication. The frame looked straight except for the passenger side repair. Mara would not approve powered movement until that rail passed non-destructive inspection. At 3:40, Daniel hired a mobile magnetic particle technician to inspect the steel frame. Aluminum body panels had to be isolated from the test and access was limited, but the technician could evaluate the weld repair and adjacent rail without removing the body. Claire watched the arrangements accumulate. You're spending more on inspections than the car cost. The car price and the safety price are different numbers. You could have a body shell tomorrow and avoid all of this with an engine hole where the engine used to be. The magnetic test found no active crack in the repair. Radiography showed an internal sleeve extending 7 inches beyond the visible weld on each side. The sleeve had 4 plug welds. 3 sat in a straight line. The 4th sat 3/8 of an inch high, matching the mislocated external bolt hole. The repair was strong enough for a low-speed test. It was also unusual enough to document. Daniel measured the frame rails. Their outside dimension did not match common replica plans. The front suspension mounting points were narrower, and the upper brackets had 2 alternate holes for competition geometry. A round socket beside the differential looked designed for a quick lift jack. None of those details alone proved factory development. Together they made Claire's kit car description less comfortable. At 5:15, the new tires arrived. Sutton's tire technician mounted them while Daniel and Mara inspected the wheels for cracks. The original knockoff hubs were secured with safety wire through drilled ears. Eli photographed the direction of every wire before it was removed and after it was replaced. Daniel then turned to the fuel system. The aluminum tank smelled of varnish. He drained less than a quart through a bonded container. Sediment contained no water but enough corrosion to block a carburetor passage. Mara prohibited using the tank. She allowed a small certified test cell mounted outside the passenger compartment with a shutoff and shield. Daniel would run only enough fuel for inspection and the 25-foot test. The 4 carburetor throats moved freely. 2 accelerator pumps were dry. Daniel did not rebuild them because doing so would take time and disturb old parts. For a low-speed movement test, the engine needed a safe idle, not full power. He cleaned the external screens, lubricated the linkage, and left internal seals untouched. At 6:03, Claire's collection director, Jason Weller, arrived with an inventory binder. He claimed the gearbox had been loaned to the body for display by a separate Sutton family trust. The trust, he said, was not a party to the challenge. Reed read the addendum and looked displeased. Claire had signed personally as authorized CEO of Sutton Motor Gallery, and the inventory binder showed the trust had transferred all display assets to the company 2 years earlier. The gearbox tag remained old, but ownership did not. The complete vehicle clause controls if it moves, Reed said quietly. Jason closed the binder. Then it shouldn't move. Daniel heard him. At 6:17, Daniel placed tamper seals on the engine mounts, bell housing, gearbox case, and rear housing. Joel signed the seal log. Mara confirmed that no prohibited assembly had been replaced. Claire approved the log with a note reserving her rights. The roadster's electrical system still held the first mystery. The master cutoff sent power to the gauges, but the ignition switch had no key cylinder. Behind the dash, Daniel found a competition toggle and a push button hidden under a hinged aluminum flap. Both were disconnected at one terminal. The loose wires had been taped, not cut. He checked continuity without energizing the ignition. The toggle controlled the coil. The button controlled a remote starter solenoid. The safety pin under the passenger seat had been wired to the master cutoff so a crew member could lock the entire system dead between runs. This was not ordinary street wiring. It was simple, accessible, and built to be serviced with gloves. Daniel reconnected the 2 tagged terminals using their existing screws. He did not press the starter. First, he removed the spark plugs, inspected each cylinder with a borescope, and turned the crank by hand. The engine stopped after 20 degrees. Claire leaned against the workbench. Furniture. Daniel reversed the crank. It moved freely backward and stopped at the same point forward. A seized bearing would usually drag in both directions. A cylinder obstruction or valve contact could create a repeatable stop. He inserted the borescope in again. In cylinder 4, a folded piece of oily shop cloth sat between the piston and an open valve. Someone had plugged the intake for storage and left material inside when the manifold went back on. Daniel did not pull it blindly. He removed the rocker cover, released pressure from the affected valve, and used long forceps while watching through the bore. The cloth came out in one piece with faded red stitching along its edge. Jason Weller looked away. "Recognize it?" Daniel asked. The old collection crew used red-edged inventory rags. Then the engine may have been prevented from turning, not unable. Claire checked the time. "You have less than 21 hours. I need to." With all plugs removed, the engine turned through complete cycles. Cylinder walls showed light storage oil and no deep corrosion. Oil drained dark but without metal. The filter contained no bearing material. Daniel used an auxiliary oiling rig until the gallery gauge climbed to 40 pounds. The starter motor worked when energized without plugs. Compression readings were uneven but adequate for a brief test. Daniel installed fresh plugs as allowed consumables and tested the ignition coil. There was no spark. The cutoff toggle wiring and coil feed all tested correctly. The failure sat inside the distributor. Daniel removed the cap. A small brass rotor contact had been lifted and turned upside down. In that position, it could not touch the cap terminal. The contact showed no wear on the wrong side. It had been deliberately parked for storage. Eli compared it with a faded instruction card inside the tool pouch. The card contained 4 steps: drain tank, open brake line, reverse rotor contact, lock master. "It's a storage sequence," Eli said. "A way to make sure nobody drives it by accident." Daniel restored the contact to its marked position. Spark returned at all 8 leads. By 8:30, they had identified 3 deliberate immobilizers: open master cutoff, disconnected brake line, and reversed rotor contact. The cloth in cylinder 4 was likely a storage error, not part of the sequence. Every correction used existing or allowed consumable parts. Mara still refused to approve a start. One engine mount showed oil-soaked rubber, and the temporary fuel cell bracket needed a second restraint. Daniel ordered the mount from a specialty supplier. It could arrive at 8 the next morning. He and Eli spent the night in the gallery's service lounge because the tamper agreement required one representative from each side whenever the bay was open. Claire left at 10. Joel stayed as Sutton's representative until Jason relieved him at midnight. At 12:18, the live stream archive disappeared from Sutton's public page. Eli noticed because he had been watching comments from bidders who saw the gauge's wake. Daniel checked the auction record. Their local copy request still showed pending. He emailed a preservation notice to Sutton, its streaming vendor, and the auction platform. Joel replied from home confirming he had already downloaded the continuous local master before leaving. He sent its file hash, not the video itself, so neither side could later substitute an edited recording. Jason read the email over Daniel's shoulder. "You assume everybody is stealing from you." "No. I assume a record is easier to agree about before it becomes expensive." At 1:05, Jason made a phone call in the parking lot. 15 minutes later, he offered Daniel $75,000 for the body shell and a separate $10,000 consulting fee to withdraw from the movement test. Sutton would keep the engine and gearbox. Claire authorized that Daniel asked. "I manage collection risk," then put it through Reed. Jason would not. Daniel declined. The next morning, Claire arrived at 7:15 and said Jason's offer had not been authorized. She removed him from the service bay but did not fire him. Jason had managed her father's collection for 20 years and knew why many display cars had been immobilized. His distrust of outsiders was useful until it crossed the sale agreement. Claire gave Daniel a chance to stop. Sutton would refund his expenses, pay him $100,000, and transfer the body without engine or gearbox. No confidentiality was required. She argued that the engine had been tagged separately for decades and that her father would never have intended a $700 sale. "Your father wrote the catalog?" Daniel asked. "No." Signed the challenge, "No." "Then we can't repair his intention. We can only follow yours." Claire withdrew the offer. The engine mount arrived at 8:04. Daniel retained the original, installed the replacement, and completed the second fuel cell restraint. Mara rechecked brakes, steering, wheel security, throttle, return fuel, shutoff, frame repair, and fire protection. At 9:22, she authorized a stationary start with no persons seated in the vehicle. The roadster sat outside on Sutton's closed service road wheels, chocked gearbox in neutral. Daniel connected the small test cell. Mara held the fire bottle. Eli remained behind a concrete barrier with the camera. Claire and Reed stood 30 feet away. Daniel opened the fuel cutoff, powered the master switch, armed the ignition toggle, and pressed the hidden starter button. The engine turned 4 times and fired. Its idle was rough for 10 seconds, then cleared as oil reached the valve train and the carburetor bowls stabilized. The exhaust note was compact and hard, less polished than a show car, and more mechanical than the replica engines Daniel had heard at weekend events. Oil pressure held at 48 pounds. Coolant temperature rose slowly. No fuel leaked. No mount shifted. Daniel shut it down after 90 seconds. Claire spoke before anyone else. "Starting is not moving. That's why the wheels are still chocked." The stationary test revealed a clutch problem. With the engine off, the gearbox selected first gear. With the engine running, the clutch would not fully release. The hydraulic slave cylinder moved, but not far enough. Daniel inspected the linkage and found 2 mounting holes on the slave bracket. The cylinder occupied the upper hole. The lower hole increased travel and aligned with a worn witness mark. Somebody had moved the cylinder during display preparation, shortening the stroke. He restored it to the witnessed position. The clutch released cleanly. At 10:37, Mara approved a walking speed test with Daniel driving and a spotter on each side. The roadster needed only 25 feet, but Daniel asked for 60 so he could accelerate, steer, and stop without turning around near the crowd. Claire insisted the test occur once. Daniel sat behind the wheel. The seat was cracked, the shifter bare, and the windshield clouded at its lower edge. He could see Eli beyond the barrier, holding the signed addendum against his chest. Daniel turned the master cutoff, armed the toggle, and started the engine. He selected first gear. At idle, the roadster moved off its marks. It traveled 30 feet, 40, then 60. Daniel depressed the clutch, applied the brakes, and stopped before the painted line. The car held straight. He shut down and remained seated until Mara checked for leaks. At 10:40 a.m., she signed that the complete vehicle had moved 61 feet under its installed engine and driveline after passing the limited safety inspection. Claire had more than 4 hours left before the deadline. She had no condition left to invoke. Reed instructed Joel to issue the complete bill of sale. The document listed the aluminum body frame, engine, gearbox, rear assembly instruments, and all attached components. Claire signed with the same pen she had used on the challenge. Daniel paid no additional price. The roadster was his for $700. The identity conflict began before the transporter arrived. A bidder posted a close photograph of the exposed aluminum door edge. Vintage car forums compared the body shape, frame rails, cutoff location, and Smith's gauges with early competition Cobras. Within 3 hours, messages ranged from informed questions to declarations that Daniel had stolen a $5 million car. Sutton issued a statement saying the body had always been cataloged as a replica and that the installed engine had served only as a display asset. The statement did not mention the signed addendum. Daniel posted nothing. He hired an enclosed transporter with a liftgate and requested continuous loading video. He weighed the complete car, sealed the hood doors, trunk, cutoff compartment, engine mounts, and gearbox, and placed all removed original consumables in a numbered case. Claire watched the loading. "I need you to understand that a complete bill of sale doesn't authenticate the body." "I agree." "And an aluminum body can be built last year." "I agree." "Then why are people calling it a factory car?" "Because people like answers faster than measurements." For the first time, they agreed about the same problem. The transporter carried the roadster to Mercer machine and brake under GPS tracking. Daniel flew home with Eli and the evidence case. He notified his commercial insurer before the car arrived and increased the shop's temporary custody coverage with borrowed money from his personal line. The blue roadster entered the second bay 3 days later. Owen Rusk stared at it from the driver's side and then looked under the passenger seat. 700 plus, more than 9,000 in tires, hoses, inspection, transport insurance, and legal review. That sounds more like you. They did not start the car again. Daniel's plan had 3 stages: establish material, age, establish configuration history, then establish identity. He hired a conservator to map paint and body construction. X-ray fluorescence showed the panels used an aluminum alloy and trace profile common in early 60s hand-formed racing bodies. That finding dated a material class, not the car. Tool marks told more. Inside the right front fender, the panel beater had used a narrow radius planishing hammer that left overlapping crescents. The marks changed direction around a cooling opening later covered by blue paint. The left side used a broader tool. 2 craftsmen had shaped opposite halves. Frame radiography confirmed the passenger side repair predated at least 3 paint layers. The internal sleeve carried a small triangular notch. Beside the corrected high bolt hole sat another empty hole drilled at a 9-degree angle and never used. Daniel searched public photographs of early roadsters. None showed the hidden repair clearly. He sent a neutral evidence packet to the Shelby American Automobile Club registrar and 2 independent historians. The packet described an unidentified early roadster and included measurements without Sutton's public claims. One historian replied that the frame dimensions resembled a small group of development cars, but engine and chassis records would be necessary. The registrar requested an in-person inspection and warned Daniel that replicas often combined authentic old components with newer bodies. That warning became Claire's next argument. Sutton filed a civil complaint claiming Daniel had replaced fiberglass panels with aluminum between the sale and arrival in California. The company did not ask to cancel the movement challenge. It asked the court to determine whether the aluminum body shown online was the same body sold in Scottsdale. The claim sounded impossible to Daniel, but it exploited a real gap. The auction catalog did not state body material. Most photographs showed painted surfaces. If Sutton could create doubt about transport custody, it could separate the valuable identity from the binding sale. The court ordered the second bay sealed for 10 days, while a neutral examiner compared the sale record with the car. That seal did not close the whole garage, but it removed half Daniel's working space during the busiest brake service week of the month. Owen parked one customer truck under a rented canopy in the yard for disassembly and rolled it inside each evening. The apprentice worked from a mobile cart because his bench sat behind the sealed door. Daniel could have moved the roadster to bonded storage and reopened the bay. The carrier wanted $6,800 for insured transfer intake inspection and 1 month of climate control. Moving it would also add another custody handoff for Sutton to question. He chose to keep the car where the transporter delivered it and absorb the lost capacity. 3 customers accepted later appointments. 1 moved a fleet job to another shop. The loss was larger than Claire's original $100,000 offer. Once Daniel counted staff hours, legal review, and insurance reserve, but it did not appear on any dramatic invoice. It appeared as empty spaces on the schedule. Eli asked to miss 2 school days for the neutral examination. Daniel refused. The boy had found the cutoff and kept the auction record, but that did not make every business emergency his responsibility. "What if they say the seals changed while I'm gone?" Eli asked. Then the fixed camera's transporter logged Joel's video, Mara's report, and court seal's answer. Evidence that needs a 14-year-old standing beside it isn't good evidence. Eli went to school. Daniel understood that the decision disappointed him. It also kept the family layer from becoming another tool in the dispute. The neutral examiner began at the auction footage, not at the car. She mapped visible paint chips on the right door, the location of 8 rivets around the footbox, a dent beneath the windshield post, and the shape of an unpainted edge where Daniel lifted the seat. Then she compared those features with the sealed vehicle. Every feature matched. She used microscopic paint imaging on a flake retained by Sutton's own service bay after Daniel first touched the door. The layer sequence was blue, enamel gray primer, a thin red guide coat, and oxidized aluminum. The same 4 layers ran continuously across the door, still attached to the car. Removing a fiberglass body and replacing it with this one would have required Daniel to reproduce random chips, dents, rivet deformation dirt lines, and paint chemistry, while the roadster remained under cameras and numbered seals. Sutton's historian suggested the aluminum doors might have been original, while the nose and quarters were later replacements. The examiner tested 18 locations visible in auction video. Every panel accessible without disassembly was aluminum before loading. Reflections from the gallery lights even showed the same shallow hammer waves later measured by the conservator. Daniel attended but did not perform the tests. His job was to produce records when asked and avoid turning certainty into attitude. On the final afternoon, the examiner removed the court seal from the passenger door and lifted the seat bottom. The brass master cutoff remained in the exact position shown when the gauges first woke. Beneath its mounting plate, old blue overspray crossed from body metal onto the original fasteners. That paint bridge predated the auction and had never been broken. The hidden switch had created the challenge. Now its untouched overspray helped close the substitution claim. Daniel's evidence answered in layers. Joel's continuous service bay footage showed the aluminum edge during the signed challenge. Mara's report described hand-formed aluminum before the roadster started. The transporter's loading video showed every seal. GPS and access logs covered the trip. Paint maps tied the blue flake Daniel touched in the gallery to continuous layers across the same panel. Most important, Claire herself stood in the video when Daniel said the body was not fiberglass. She had not disagreed about what he touched. She had disagreed about what it meant. The court dismissed the panel substitution claim after expedited discovery. Sutton's insurer advised Claire that pursuing it further could jeopardize coverage for the auction dispute. Claire changed pressure rather than repeating the same accusation. Her compliance office sent the city of Oildale a documented concern that Mercer Machine and Brake was storing racing fuel in a mixed-use building without the proper hazardous material plan. The concern was based on live stream footage of Daniel using a temporary fuel cell at Sutton. The city fire marshal arrived the next morning. Daniel did not accuse him of acting for Claire. He opened every cabinet, produced his fuel inventory, and showed that the temporary cell had been drained, purged, and transported empty under the carrier's manifest. The shop stored ordinary gasoline only inside vehicle tanks. The inspection still found a violation. 2 one-gallon metal cans of methanol used for model engine testing by a customer had been left in an unlabeled lower cabinet. Daniel had accepted the cans months earlier and forgotten them. The marshal required immediate hazardous waste removal, a corrected chemical inventory, and a flammable storage cabinet before the second bay could reopen. Daniel complied. The cabinet disposal and lost work cost $4,800. For 3 days, Owen handled both customer jobs in one bay while the blue roadster sat behind a fire partition. Claire's report did not close the garage. It exposed a real weakness Daniel had to own. Eli asked whether Sutton had won something. The marshal made the shop safer, Daniel said. That part isn't hers. The phrase changed how they handled every later attack. They corrected what was valid and documented what was leverage. The roadster inspection took place 6 weeks after the sale. The registrar, an independent Ford engine specialist, a metallurgist, and a conservation photographer met at Mercer Machine and Brake. Sutton sent Reed Jason Weller and its own historian. They began with numbers. The engine casting date assembly marks, cylinder head features, and carburation matched an early 60s competition development configuration. The gearbox used close ratios and a case date within months of the engine. Neither number appeared on any stolen vehicle registry. The frame carried no conventional production number where expected. Under the left foot box, ultraviolet examination revealed a sequence written in old yellow inspection paint XR4. The same letters appeared on the back of the brass cutoff switch hidden since installation. The registrar knew references to an experimental roadster called XR4 reportedly dismantled after a testing accident. Public accounts disagreed about whether it had been a complete car, a frame configuration, or an internal nickname. No surviving document tied the nickname to Daniel's roadster. The panel marked the finding as suggestive, not decisive. Then the passenger side repair became central. An archive at a California racing museum held contact sheets from a 1963 test session. Daniel had requested every frame repair image associated with the XR program, not a photograph of a complete car. One contact sheet showed a damaged passenger rail on a bare aluminum roadster. A fabricator knelt beside the rail with a drill fixture. The visible repair contained 3 aligned plug holes, 1 high mistake, and an angled pilot hole beside it. Daniel's rail carried the same pattern. Sutton's historian argued that a later replica builder could have copied the photograph. The museum had never published the contact sheet, but access records showed 6 researchers had viewed the box since 1995. Copying remained possible. The panel needed evidence that did not depend only on restricted access. The photograph's caption named the fabricator Walter Dane. Walter was 91 and lived in assisted housing 2 hours from the museum. The registrar did not bring him as a surprise witness. Daniel's attorney contacted Walter's son, supplied the photographs, explained why both sides disagreed, and scheduled a recorded interview only after Walter's physician and family agreed he could participate. Both sides submitted questions in advance. Walter remembered the repair because the misplaced hole had cost him half a day. The paper template was mirrored wrong, he said. I drilled the first pilot uphill. Couldn't use it. Sleeved the rail, moved the fixture, and put a triangle relief in the sleeve so it would pass the old weld inside. The triangular relief had never been visible in the photograph. Daniel's radiograph showed it inside the rail. Walter described another mistake. When he reinstalled the passenger footbox, he drilled one rivet through a folded paper shim. The paper remained trapped between aluminum and frame until the next teardown, when he expected someone to remove it. The panel located the rivet without drilling. Terahertz imaging showed a thin organic layer beneath its head. With permission from both sides and under conservation protocol, the registrar removed that single rivet. A brown paper fragment lay folded underneath. On it, in faded pencil, were the last two digits of a measurement 7/8. Walter laughed once when shown the image. That was mine. I wrote every shim thickness because I never trusted my memory. Handwriting comparison alone could not authenticate a vehicle. The hidden triangular sleeve, wrong pilot angle, footbox, rivet, period, paper frame, paint sequence, engine dates, gearbox configuration, cutoff marks, and XR4 inspection paint formed a chain no single copied photograph explained. The panel certified the Roadster as the surviving XR4 development chassis and body rebuilt after a 1963 test accident and later retained with its period test engine and gearbox. It was not certified as a standard production Cobra. Its historical value came from its experimental configuration and documented repair. The certification created another ownership offer before Daniel had decided what restoration should mean. A private collector offered $3.2 million for the complete Roadster. Sutton offered $1 million plus withdrawal of every claim if Daniel sold the car back before the panel released its public report. A Heritage Foundation proposed shared stewardship with the car, remaining at Daniel's shop during conservation and traveling to museums under loan. The private offer would have made Daniel financially secure. It required a full cosmetic restoration, including replacing imperfect aluminum panels to create the appearance of a finished production Cobra. The contract allowed the buyer to describe it publicly as an early factory Cobra without emphasizing the development qualification. Daniel declined. Sutton's offer would have protected the shop and ended the conflict, but it required confidentiality about the panel substitution claim and the fuel complaint. Daniel declined that too. He chose the foundation. The foundation purchased a 60% conservation interest based on an independent appraisal that separated market value from historical importance. Daniel retained 40% physical custody during restoration and a paid 5-year contract for Mercer machine and brake to stabilize the frame, preserve the aluminum rebuild safety systems, and document the test configuration. Neither party could sell, repaint, replace panels, or represent the Roadster as a production car without mutual approval. The agreement paid Daniel enough to clear his remaining shop debt, cover taxes, restore the second bay, and fund the work. It did not turn him into a millionaire overnight. Most of the money belonged to project labor insurance documentation and conservation over 5 years. The public consequence for Sutton came at its annual collection sale. The auction licensing board reviewed the deleted live stream, the ambiguous engine tag, Jason's unauthorized offer, and the failed panel substitution complaint. It did not revoke Sutton's license. It required revised lot descriptions for assembled display vehicles, 7-year video retention, written disclosure of separately tagged components, and executive approval before public challenges altered sale terms. Claire removed Jason from collection authority after learning he had reversed the rotor contact and disconnected the brake line before the sale without recording the storage sequence in the catalog file. He had intended to prevent an unsafe accidental start, but his undocumented actions helped create the false impression of a dead machine. He remained with Sutton as an archive consultant under supervision because his historical knowledge still had value. Claire had one decision left. The foundation asked Sutton to loan the original tool pouch display records and 1,997 gallery photographs to the XR4 archive. She could refuse. The bill of sale gave Daniel the pouch, but Sutton owned the records. She agreed to the loan without seeking naming rights. 3 months after authentication, Claire visited Mercer machine and brake. The methanol cans were gone. A new flammable cabinet stood against the far wall with a complete inventory sheet clipped to its door. The blue Roadster rested on frame stands in the second bay. Body panels supported but not replaced. Daniel showed her the passenger rail through an inspection opening. The high bolt hole, angled pilot, and triangular sleeve remained visible. "My father had this for 29 years, she said. He never knew. Maybe he knew enough not to separate it. Or maybe he liked the shape. That was enough, too." Claire placed the restored live stream master and the early inventory photographs on Daniel's documentation desk. "The public version will go back online with the complete challenge and the final bill of sale. Your board require that number." Daniel logged the transfer and handed her a copy. The first conservation task was not making the engine shine. It was stabilizing the frame repair Walter Dane had described. The weld remained sound, but corrosion had begun between the sleeve and outer rail. Daniel designed a low-pressure treatment that reached the cavity without cutting the original repair. The foundation's engineer reviewed it. Walter's son carried the drawings to his father. Walter approved with one change. Daniel's first plan placed an access hole beside the old angled pilot. Walter suggested using the mistake itself. "I drilled the hole," he said in a recorded message. "Might as well let it do one useful job." Daniel inserted the treatment wand through the wrong hole. Nothing new was cut. Eli documented the process. On the archive sheet, he labeled the opening 1963 mislocated pilot reused for 2026 conservation access. The error had changed from embarrassment to evidence to tool. At the Foundation's first open day, visitors saw the roadster without polished paint. The peeling blue remained. The aluminum edges were protected but visible. A clear panel beneath the passenger seat showed the master cutoff and safety pin that began the story. Beside it, a screen played the unedited moment the gauges came alive. The exhibit label used precise language. XR4 Experimental Roadster, 1963, development configuration, surviving period engine, and gearbox authenticated through frame repair and material evidence. It did not call the car a production Cobra. Daniel spoke for 10 minutes about voltage breaks and the difference between making an engine fire and making a vehicle safe to move. Claire stood near the back with Reed. She did not take the microphone. After the visitors left, Eli climbed into the passenger side and lifted the loose seat bottom. The brass cutoff had been cleaned only enough to preserve movement. The drilled safety pin still hung from its old wire. "Can I turn it?" he asked. Daniel checked the workboard. Fuel system disconnected. Battery on maintenance supply. Gearbox neutral. Wheels chocked. Not today. Eli returned the seat bottom without complaint. The roadster would move again after brake rebuilding, tank conservation, and a second frame review. That work would take months. The 25-foot challenge had never promised restoration, and Daniel would not let the viral video set the shop's schedule. He closed the bay for the evening. The Foundation contract hung in the office beside the fire inspection clearance. The $700 bill of sale remained in the evidence case with Mara's 61-foot certification. Before lowering the blue garage door, Daniel walked to the passenger rail and placed the narrow treatment wand through Walter's old angled hole. A small line of clear preservative traveled into the hidden sleeve and appeared at the drain exactly where the radiograph predicted. Eli marked the result on the frame map flow confirmed. Daniel removed the wand, capped the original hole with a reversible plug, and switched off the bay lights. Under the final amber work lamp, the roadster's peeling paint did not resemble a finished trophy. It looked like a machine paused between uses. Beneath the passenger seat, the master cutoff remained open, and the safety pin rested in its drilled slot. This time, it was not hiding a car from anyone. It was waiting for Daniel and Eli to finish the work before the old gauges came alive again.